So Abbas, thank you very much for making time to share your insights into the future of leadership.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks for the opportunity.
Now, before we go into leadership, can you maybe share with us a little bit about your background? Where did you grow up?
So I was born and grew up in an area called Athlone, which is a coloured area in Cape Town, which was also the epicenter of student uprising in the 70s and 80s. So that really shaped me as a youth. I was always involved in student politics from school through to university. I then moved to Joburg for work and got lucky and did well. And so when I moved back to Cape Town a few years later, it was to the greeny, leafy suburbs of Cape Town. And you know, South Africa has these two very different worlds. The one, the greeny, leafy suburbs, and then the other world, the townships, where you need to be really resilient to survive. While it's on the greeny, leafy suburbs, it's a first world scenario. And so the reality in South Africa is that if we want to move forward as a country, we need to see how we bring these two worlds closer, because we can't move forward because the two world views coming out of these two different worlds are very different of what a future South Africa looks like. So I think growing up in that environment definitely shaped me and made me who I am today.
So Abbas, what was your dream career as you grew up?
Well, again, so you know, when you're growing up in the green leafy suburbs, I suppose it's very different. It's difficult. It's different to growing up in an impoverished area, because thinking about planning a dream career is not easy. And so the people that I was in the circles that I was moving in, it was very different discussions. It was about how do you overcome apartheid regime. And that was a lot of the dialogue at that time. And so the future careers was something that was, you know, it would happen once we overcome the apartheid state. And so when growing up, you were surrounded with different people, different professionals, etc. But there was other things driving us as youth at that time.
And can you tell us who inspired you in those early days?
So I think I was inspired by many people in our community. You know, firstly, our political leaders at that time, who gave us hope for a better future. I think that was a very important part of us growing up and being inspired. And then also our local business people in the area. You know, they supported the community, whether they were sponsoring sports clubs, places of worship, local events, and everyone knew who these business people were. And everyone went to them, and so they were supporting a broad range of people. And so when you look at these business people, I think it was very inspirational. See, you know, how these people struggled with what they had achieved, but yet were willing to support the broader community. So again, like I say, many people inspired me when I was growing up, and I think ultimately, you know, the parents that you see standing up early to go to work, those are the people that inspire you. You always hear nowadays people in corporate say, you know, they work very hard. I'm not quite sure about it. Everybody works hard. You know, people that needs to go to a factory and be there at 7 o'clock, to stand up at 5 o'clock, they work hard. And so when you're in a career that you enjoy doing, like many people in corporate, it's not working hard. You work long hours. But the person that must go to a factory where he doesn't really enjoy that, you know, that's a different type of work. And so I think in the corporate world, when you see people succeed, yes, everyone works hard, and some people just get lucky at the right place at the right time.
And where did you start your career?
So I started my career when I left varsity into government. We had a bursary with government, and so I started with the National Department of Transport, and this was pre-94. The country was going through change at the time, so it was a very interesting space to be in at that time.
And then when did you get into the world of engineering?
Yeah, so I joined the National Department of Transport, and that was in engineering environment. I was the first black engineer that the National Department of Transport gave a bursary to and employed. And so, like I say, growing up in that world was very interesting, seeing the changes around you. And the technical, you know, developing yourself from a technical perspective in that world was not easy. Of course, it was still very much a white male-dominated world, and so you had to overcome those boundaries. And within the community, we didn't have many role models, that we could look up into. There was far and few between. So it was not an easy space to develop technical expertise, and there were many challenges and people trying to scupper your career along the way, and you needed to overcome that besides doing the technical stuff.
Now, Abbas, today you are the Innovation Director at Aurecon, one of the big global engineering companies. Can you tell us a little bit more about what does your portfolio encompass?
So the portfolio encompasses thinking about the future. Director of Innovation is not our technical, digital stuff. We have all departments running the digital, technical side. But for us, innovation is what does the future look like? What does the engineering sector look like, and how do we adapt to that? And more importantly, as a large engineering company, how do we help shape that better future? And so innovation for us is saying, all industries are being disrupted, all professions are being disrupted, and how do you deal with that disruption? Because you have a choice. You can either become a disruptor or you will be disrupted. And so we're choosing to become a disruptor. In order to do that, you need to be future looking, you need to think about the future very differently. And it is something which many corporates struggle with. The people that head up corporates have been trained in a certain way, in a way that deals with the numbers, bringing shareholder value. And there's not much time lifting up people's heads to actually look into the future and creating a culture within business to actually think about the future. And so for us, we've been on a very interesting journey as far as innovation, saying how do we change the way people think in our business. And it's not about the technology. I think the technology becomes an enabler. But you create a culture where the whole business can think about the future in a different way and be positive about the future and say, how do we contribute towards a better future?
Can you maybe share with us in your view, what does the future of engineering hold?
So I think if I take an example from the engineering space, we're busy with a huge tower in Dubai. So we got one of the world experts on tall buildings, structural engineer, and they asked him at a conference a few years ago, what is the most difficult thing that he's dealing with on this building? And many people expect him to talk about materials of the building, the sway of the building, because this thing is quite high. And he says, no, the most difficult thing he has to deal with is that the lifts in this building is specially designed for this building. It's a kilometer high, so the lifts need to go up at quite a high speed. And his biggest problem is how do the people using the lift not get motion sickness. So now you have a structural engineer trained with a hardcore technical world to deal with analysis, etc. And now you need to speak to a doctor about how to overcome motion sickness. And that is the future engineer. It is the engineer that can think out of the box. It's the engineer that's going to be innovative, that's going to be creative. And so for us, it's about bringing creativity into a hardcore technical world. We live in the STEM world, science, technology, engineering, and maths, and now we say, how do we bring art into that? And there's this whole new narrative around STEAM. And so now we have art classes, we have drawing classes, and we use tools like design thinking to get our people to think more creatively, think in a different way. And so it becomes a nice way, or a nice tool to use to introduce different systems thinking into our business. And so now when you go into our strat sessions, they are all big whiteboards, a lot of sticky notes, which wasn't around 2 years ago. And so that, that has had a dramatic impact on our business in changing the culture of the business, changing the way the business does things, and also getting people to embrace people outside of our box. Because I think most professions do innovate very well, but they innovate within a box. So whether it's finance, whether it's legal, whether it's engineering, we operate very well in that box. And once you start speaking outside of the box, when I say outside of the box, I'm talking about creative people like artists, like musicians, graphic designers. We don't deal with them well. And so for us, it's about bringing those people into meetings, bringing them into decision making, bringing them into strategy, because that unlocks whole new way of thinking, which we as technical people don't necessarily see. So for us, it's not nice to have. We're going on the journey not because we want to be creative, but it's a fundamental part of our survival. It's a fundamental part of shaping what the business is going to be into the future.
So, Abbas, looking back over your career, would you say there was a turning point, a major turning point?
So I don't believe life is a linear path where there's one turning point. I think there are many times in your life when you need to make decisions that will send you down a different path. If I think back, some of the things for me would be, well, firstly, just getting a bursary to go study at UCT was a big thing. Because if I did not get that bursary, I'd probably not have ended up at UCT, would not have become an engineer. Being the first black engineer at the National Department of Transport in South Africa, I think was quite an important step in my career and placing me into that space and making me think about the engineering space in a very different way. And then, very important, I think leaving government to start my own business when my wife was pregnant with twins was, I think, quite a fundamental step. Moving into a very different direction. And then, more recently, I think losing everything during the 2010 World Cup also sent me down a very different path. It was actually very surreal because the country was on a high with the World Cup, and yet I was on a very low from a financial perspective. I was on a financial low. So that was an interesting time, but it did help define me as a person. And I think when you go through loss, it definitely helps you look deep into yourself and realize what is important. Because we often say the important things are family and friends and stuff, but until you get tested, it's a very different story.
And what would you say is driving you today?
So I think innovation and thinking about the future. Because for me, futures thinking is important because it trains you to think systemically. And South Africa and Africa, we have many complex, wicked problems to solve. And you cannot solve these problems when you think analytically. And so approaching a wicked problem from one perspective or through one lens can lead to unexpected outcomes. So, once you know you are dealing with a complex, wicked problem, how do you then innovate to solve that problem? And so innovation in its broader context. So innovation for me is about disrupting an existing ecosystem that is not functioning optimally. And as you know, there's lots of wicked problems across the continent, from rapid urbanization to technology to smart cities. All of these things are very complex, wicked problems, and I think it's critical that we think more systemically about these problems. Because what happens is you'll have finance people coming in looking at it from a finance angle, the legal people from a legal, technical people from, and that creates the silo-based thinking. And although we know these things are complex, we naturally fall into that way of thinking, which causes problems.
Now, Abbas, talking about leadership, and I know it's a big question, but what does the future of leadership mean to you?
So I'd like to believe that the future leadership will be built around ethics and sustainability. What we have done well is regulate around ethics. If you play by the rules, you tick the ethical box. And we've seen the result of this, whether it's the Enron or the Steinhoffs of this world. And even analysts, when they refer to these companies, they will say that this company is sailing close to the edge. So what does this actually mean? So why is that accepted norm? And so while that is the accepted norm, this concept of a triple bottom line is actually a fallacy. And so we should, rather than accept that shareholder value is the dominant thing driving corporates, and realize that then determines corporate behavior. And so the figures in South Africa speaks for itself. After 1994, we've become the most unequal society in the world. And so if we honestly believe we are going to take South Africa out of the problems that we have by going down this path, we are greatly mistaken. And this is the critical role that future leadership will play. shaping our country. We need a new type of leadership that puts South Africa ahead of shareholder value at all cost. And it sounds very airy-fairy, but the reality, not only in South Africa, but globally, is this issue of the 1% has become a huge problem. And people are becoming fairly frustrated with it, and we see social upheaval across the world in the response to this 1%. And so we as South Africa, we need to decide where we want to go, and the future leaders need to decide where we are taking this country. And the concept of growing shareholder value at all costs is fundamental to that problem.
And Abbas, what have you learned from your own journey that you consider most important for building future leaders?
For me, fundamentally surround yourself with good people that you trust, people that are better than you. Sometimes we feel that, if we're the leader, we need to be the best at everything, and that's never the case. You can never be the best at everything. And so the sooner you realize that, surround yourself with really, really good people, because that good people brings value to you as a leader, and true leaders are not threatened by good people, and surrounding themselves with good people. And so it is a mistake which a lot of people make early on in their career, thinking that I shouldn't surround myself with better people, they will replace me. And that is never the case.
And Abbas, when you speak to aspiring leaders, what is it you tell them they should focus on for future-proofing their career?
So for me, future-proofing your career, fundamental to it is this concept of thinking about the future, about innovation. And so how do you do that differently? And so previously, where you entered into one career, studied for one career, and that was it, it's not going to take you into the future. And so whether you are legal, finance, engineering, medical, these technical worlds need to understand that in order to be innovative, you need to be creative. And unfortunately, this is something that's beaten out of us at a very young age. If you're good at maths and science, you go down a certain path, and then the others go and do art. We now at a point as a company that's saying we're actually looking for engineers who are artists, who are musicians. Because this creativity is something that is going to be the differentiator. We see artificial intelligence replacing a lot of the rudimental stuff, the repetitive stuff across all professions. And so the future professional engineer is not necessarily going to be only the best technically qualified person, but that goes for all professions. And so, when you have children or yourself in a career, make sure that this creativity is a fundamental part of your career. And how do you do that? Make sure if your children are young, introduce them to music, to art, and make that an important part. And I think even at school and university level, we should be looking at how do we get the engineering faculty to collaborate with the arts faculty. How do we get this people to start thinking out of their silo boxes? Because I think the silo box way of thinking it becomes very problematic when we start trying to deal with these complex, wicked problems that, because of technology, it's coming towards us at a rapid pace. And we think we can deal with it from a technical perspective. And in most cases, it's not a technical problem. The technology can deal with issues, but they're much more complex. It's social, political, economic issues that's at play. And so, for me, yes, whatever career you're following, make sure that you do have that creativity included in your expertise.
Now, Abbas, talking about technology, what would you say are the key technologies that can and should enable the leadership of the future?
So for me, it's not so much about the technology, it's more about the trends. And so when I talk about trends, it's if we look at the whole concept of a shared economy. Shared economy, we see big brands like Uber, Airbnb. These are brands that understand the shared economy. They create trends before there are trends. And we have millennials that have now starting to embrace the shared economy. They use Uber, they use Airbnb. But there's a new generation coming through, which is Generation A. These are youngsters born from 2010. The big difference between Generation A and millennials is that Generation A are born to millennials. So for them, the concept of embracing the shared economy, they're not going to understand what you're talking about. In 10 years' time, these children are going to be adults. If we're expecting these children to get a job, save money, buy a car, and sit in traffic, it's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. They're not going to understand what you're talking about. And so we do not yet know what this shared economy looks like. We think we're in it, we're not yet in it. It's similar to the internet. When the internet was launched, you needed a computer science degree to use it. It was HTTP, /, and if at that stage you had to tell people and you had to tell computer scientists, a 3-year-old would be able to use the internet, they would say, no, it's impossible. Once the internet became normal, that allowed for stuff like Uber and Airbnb, all these things, to then change the world dramatically and start disrupting industries. The same with the shared economy. Once the shared economy becomes normal, this concept of ownership is going to change dramatically. And so for me, it's not about the technology, it's about the trend. And once you understand the trend, it's then what technology will make use and start disrupting other spaces using this whole trend of a shared economy. And so therefore, when you think about the future, you need to think at that macro trend levels and not at the technology level, because the technology is only the enabler for the bigger disruption that's coming. And the disruption that we see is normally from outside of sectors. Uber disrupted the taxi industry, same with Airbnb, same with Apple. Apple's were not in the mobile space, and they just disrupted the space. And so we see that happening all the time. And so whichever sector you are, it's about saying what is going to disrupt your space.
And Abbas, when you speak to future leaders, what is it you tell them? How should they navigate social media? How should they go about using social media for building their own brand?
Again, I think social media will become the norm in the future. And it's interesting because if you look at Facebook and these things, how different age groups and demographics are using it, and once older adult people move towards the social media, the youngsters just move away from it. So that will be an ongoing change, and as the technology changes, as the shared economy comes in, new social media is going to start coming out. But you need to be part of that world, one way or the other. And what comes out of that is sometimes very interesting. So LinkedIn, as an example, people obviously use it to find jobs, to connect to people. But one of the things that have come out of LinkedIn, which was not necessarily designed for, was that if you look at movements of people nowadays and lots of immigrants taking place, and countries can't keep track with where people are. LinkedIn is probably the organization that's got the latest stats on movements of people, and specifically professionals, to the day. Because as you move, you change your location. So they've got the most up-to-date stats of movement of people globally, which no one else has.
That's interesting.
And so this is an organization that was built out of an app that was driving finding a job. And so that's what I'm saying, the social media will change dramatically, and you'll end up with things and just start discovering things which you never even thought of. And so again, being at the cutting edge of that becomes, I think, important for future leaders.
Now, Abbas, as a mentor to future leaders, can you maybe share a success story with us where you mentored somebody and that person took your advice to heart?
Yeah, I think for me, so I love mentoring, not necessarily because you can teach youngsters, but because I learned so much from it myself. I think it's really a two-way street, and you engage with youngsters who are same age as your children, but it's a very different sort of relationship that you have with them. And so for anyone like myself, of my age, thinking about the future and whose job it is to think about the future, engaging with young people is critical. And so mentoring becomes very important. And so for me, it's definitely a two-way street, firstly. Um, I've started to get this reputation within our company that the people that I mentor leave our business. And for me, it's always about, when I mentor someone, it's about just opening their minds to the possibilities and opportunities. So that's firstly really fantastic when you can do that, because I think the time of a person working for one company their whole life, it just doesn't exist. It's not going to exist in the future. I've been very fortunate that I haven't been longer than 5 years at any job myself. So I've mentored a number of youngsters both in the business and externally. And for me, what's really motivational and inspiring is when these youngsters embrace the concept of that they as an individual can make a difference, and the responsibility that is on them as individuals to say, how do we change the world moving forward? And seeing them their participation and their contribution to society beyond their career, beyond just the profession that they have, and beyond their qualification. I always start in these sessions, remind youngsters, wherever they come from, whichever the community they come from, how are they going to make a difference in that community? And you don't need to wait to have all the money in the bank to do that. The fact that you have a professional qualification immediately places you at a level way above of many people in our country who have not been given that opportunity. So you have that privilege of having a degree or qualification, and therefore you have a responsibility back to your community that helped get you to that point. And so for me, that is always very heartening, when youngsters embrace that, and you can see that aha moment in youngsters, especially when you, over a period of time, see how they've changed their worldview. So that is very heartening.
Now, Abbas, are there any role models of leadership that you would suggest future leaders should study and maybe learn from?
So I think we mustn't make the mistake of believing that people are all the same, because people are very different. And so depending on your personality type, there are certain role models that you can read up on, and read autobiographies and biographies are a fantastic way to engage with someone that you might never meet. So I love reading autobiographies for that. But if you look at someone like Elon Musk, so he has this personality trait of what's called a athlete. He knows what his goal is, he knows what he wants to do, he knows what he needs to do to get there, and if you get in his way, he will take you out. And so those type of personality traits, and if you have that sort of personality, then you look at those sort of people. But then there's other people, if you look at Virgin, so Richard Branson, he's much more of an artist type person. The artist type person is the one that transcends and taking people to Mars. And so if you have that sort of personality, then those are the sort of people you need to look up. So you first need to understand what is your personality trait. And once you understand what that is, you then look at who are the business role models out there that matches your personality, and then go and do research on that person. But ultimately for me, it's always about leaders that making a difference in society and the world, not necessarily how much money they've brought to the bottom line and to shareholder value. Now,
Abbas, how can our listeners get hold of you, and where should they follow you?
So I'm on LinkedIn, so that's probably the easiest place to find me. On LinkedIn.
And last but not least, is there one piece of advice that you would like to convey to future leaders that they should implement in their own leadership?
So for me, it's be brave enough to ask the difficult questions. The current way of doing business and measuring success is creating a small and smaller group of super wealthy individuals and corporates. And we need to ask ourselves, is there a model of business, is this model of business going to create a better life for us and for our children? And so how do you as an individual contribute towards a narrative and a dialogue that can envision a different future? Because if you can't envision it, it's not going to happen. We will then continue down the path that we are currently on. And so for me, future leaders, it's about, say, being brave enough to ask those difficult questions, going into the unknown, and saying you want to be part of creating a better future.
Well, Abbas, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your wisdom, and also sharing your own leadership journey, and especially your insights into innovation and the future of this world and the future of the country.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.